Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to your election night updates. My name is Ivana Harinkyu, and I am joined for, I think, our last update of the night with managing producer over on Reckon and the host of the Reckon Interview podcast, John Hammontree. And John is going to join us here tonight, kind of wrap up what we've seen tonight. We do know we have a winner in the Alabama's U.S. Senate seat race. We know that winner is Tommy Tuberville. We'll talk about the margins here in a second, and we'll touch a little bit on what's happening in the presidential race. So, John, let's first talk about Tommy Tuberville. Now, we know that I guess U.S. Senator-elect Tuberville at this point, right now, according to the Associated Press polling or results, vote results, I should say, there's been 72% of the expected vote in. Of that 72%, the AP has Tuberville at about 63% and Jones at just 37%. So that's a pretty big margin. That's with about 80% of precincts reporting, according to the Associated Press. So that's a pretty big margin here. John, is that something that you expected to see tonight?
I mean, it's a little larger right now than polling indicated. And I do think we'll see some tightening as the night goes on. I mean, obviously not enough to change who the victor is. Tommy Tuberville will be the senator for Alabama, but it'll get under 60% probably. There's still a lot of outstanding votes in Jefferson County and Mobile County and Tuscaloosa County that reliably go Democratic, and so I do think we'll see some of that tightening a little bit as the night goes on. And it'll get probably under 60 for Tuberville and above 40 for Jones, but it's definitely not the result that Jones wanted, and it's exactly what Tuberville thought from day one that he was going to get.
We had some comments earlier from our one of our guest columnists, Cameron Smith, and he was saying that something that he thought that some people who maybe wouldn't vote straight party Republican, but who would take a little bit more policy into effect, were maybe a little bit turned off by, and these are Republicans, could be a little bit turned off by Jones for not voting for now Justices Kavanaugh and Justice Amy Coney Barrett. He said that, if he did have any chance with Republican voters, those two no votes kind of put him on the outs with those Republicans. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's interesting to hear that perspective, somebody up in Tennessee, but, I think here in Alabama, people who were going to vote for Tuberville would have found any excuse legislatively to do so for Jones, whether it was those votes or it was, Jones's stance on abortion. They were looking for an excuse. What we have seen and has been somewhat surprising is currently, the last numbers I looked at, Tuberville is lagging the president by about 60 to 70,000 votes. So we have seen, as the night goes on, we may see 100,000 Trump voters pull the ticket for Jones. And that is surprising in a state where it's so easy to vote straight ticket. And so, that does give some indication that Jones's message was resonating. It just didn't resonate enough.
And we know that we spoke with Mike Kaysen earlier. Mike Kaysen is in Montgomery at the Renaissance Hotel where the Tommy Tuberville watch party has been and where the, I guess now, victory party is. Now, before, when we talked to Mike, and this was before the race had been called, and Mike told us that he had seen now Senator Tuberville earlier on in the day and spoken with him, and he said that that Tuberville was in good spirits, but he wasn't necessarily calling the race. He wasn't seeming overly confident, and he didn't seem to have any sort of air of overconfidence about him. He said, "This has been a race. I've been campaigning hard for the past about 2 years, and it all comes down to tonight." So that's what we heard earlier. That Mike said that Tuberville was telling his supporters and telling media at that event. We also know that Tuberville did speak on the phone with President Donald Trump earlier on today. So, John, we saw that side of Tommy Tuberville earlier this evening, and now we have seen him take that kind of acceptance speech, that victory speech after the race had been called in his favor. And we got a little bit of a shift from Tommy Tuberville there. Do you have some of those kind of key notes of what he said during that acceptance speech?
Yeah, I mean, he certainly came into it with some swagger. He was braggadocious. He, quoted Doug Jones ad where he told his opponents effectively, you can go to hell and get a job. It's not something that you are necessarily used to seeing in American politics, other than perhaps in the last 5 years. It's honestly not something we're typically used to seeing, even in football. What Senator-elect Tuberville, the background that he comes from, typically, you're kind of taught to be gracious and magnanimous in victory as well as in defeat. But he came out, he praised Donald Trump as the greatest president in the history of America. He praised Rush Limbaugh, some things that you would expect him to do, but he also did not go out of his way to thank Doug Jones for his service or anything like that, which I think stands in somewhat marked contrast to the way that Senator Jones, when he was elected in 2017, did thank people like Jeff Sessions and stuff like that who came before him. So it is a difference of policy and style and substance, and may give some indication to why he didn't do so many public events before getting elected.
I'm looking to check on those numbers and to check on any other reporting we have regarding these other races that are still being counted and votes that are still being counted. We know even after 7 p.m. there were still people that were standing in lines at different polling places, and they were allowed still to vote. If you were in line at that point, you got to stand in line and continue to wait to cast your ballot. So there's a lot of there's been, I should say, a lot of early voting across the country, Alabama and more. Alabama was absentee voting, but a lot of people chose to do it in person, absentee early. So there's a lot of votes. We can argue over the words, but there's a lot of votes that were done before today, John. Now we look at some of these races, like the presidential race, and there are so many of these ballots that were cast early and have not been counted yet, and predictably may not be counted tonight. What do you think are we gonna get a result in that presidential election tonight, or do you think we're gonna have to wait tomorrow or even maybe a day or so after that?
It's looking unlikely that we will know the final results of the election tonight, unless we get a decisive victory in Ohio, unless we see some numbers for Michigan and Wisconsin. Basically, all of these states would have to go for Biden in order for us to be able to declare a winner tonight. If these states go for Trump, then it seems more likely, or if enough of these states go for Trump, it seems more likely that it'll come down to Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is saying that they won't have their absentee ballots all tabulated and counted until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. They have them in hand, but what they've been doing is they've been kind of working through them in batches while also going through same day voting. And so they're kind of working through those, and they're expecting all of those to be wrapped up by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So Pennsylvania is kind of the big get right now, unless Ohio were to flip for Biden, or something truly shocking happens in Texas, which seems less likely as the night goes on, or Iowa. But it seems most likely that we will know this tomorrow. And then, in terms of other ballot discrepancies, there's been some indication that there were, I think, something like 300 outstanding ballots in Miami-Dade County that were at the post office. That would theoretically be enough to affect that race. So we might see some lawsuits in the weeks ahead that decides that. But kind of any indication that we were going to go, in the next 2 hours, who was going to be our next president or continue to be president, as the case may be, seems to be out the window.
And I know that's something that a lot of people did not want to hear, but unfortunately, that seems to be the reality, that we may not have a winner in that presidential election tonight. Just Central Time, less than 2 hours left on November the 3rd. Now, something I wanted to ask you, John, as well, and this was something that our columnist Kyle Whitmire mentioned earlier, and that was that Democrats in Alabama were on track to hit 1 million voters, at least for Jones, today on November 3rd. And that is so much better than what happened in 2016, 2012, 2008. But the problem that Alabama Democrats faced was that the margins just got wider for Alabama Republicans. They just turned out in bigger numbers than they had before. And is that something that we expected to see, or is that kind of a shock?
Well, Republicans first crossed that million vote threshold for the president in 2004 when Bush was running for re-election against John Kerry. And before that, neither party had ever crossed that threshold. Since then, the Republicans have regularly crossed it, and each election cycle more than the last. I think the Republicans are on track to exceed the vote for Donald Trump in 2016 and certainly to exceed Kay Ivey's vote in 2018. So it's not necessarily surprising that they are going to be well over 1 million. There was some thought that perhaps with some Republican women in the suburbs potentially switching to the Democratic Party or Democratic votes, at least against Donald Trump, or with the COVID pandemic or the ongoing recession, that some voters would either stay home or flip. But Donald Trump ran a campaign over the last 2 years where he was very heavily dedicated to turning out his base, and Alabama Republican voters are his base. What I think has been surprising is what Kyle talked about, that a Democratic Party that 4 years ago was in shambles somehow got their stuff together enough to get 1 million votes, to potentially get 1 million votes. I mean, again, like you said, it's not going to close the gap, but they went from a party that had 2 part-time staffers in 2016 to a party that had 50 full-time staffers here. If you look back at the past 150 years in Alabama politics, Democrats held the state for 100 years, and it took Republicans 100 years to break that threshold. They finally did it for the first time in 2010. I think that it's going to take the Democrats a little bit longer in the wilderness in Alabama for a little while, but I think early indication is they've got a lot more money in the bank than they had 2 years ago, and they have a lot more staffers. And assuming people come out of this not feeling completely set back by the Jones loss, you have people who are kind of more eager to throw their hat in the ring and to run. So that could set up some interesting races in 2022 for Shelby's seat and for Ivey's seat, and it could set up some, probably looking further down the line, some competitive races in maybe 2026, 2032, and 2030.
It's hard to look past tonight right now, let alone to 2030 and 2026. But we appreciate you trying to broaden our look a little bit here, John. I want to just check back in, say we got 81% of precincts reporting in that U.S. Senate race. We know that Tommy Tuberville has already been declared the winner. But just to give you a look at those margins, 75% of the expected vote is in, and we've got Tuberville leading at about 63%, Jones at 37%. So pretty big margins there. And again, we know that the AP has already called that race. It was called about a little after 9 p.m. So we know it's called, and now it's just about looking at the margins. We do have the county by county breakdown on those numbers on AL.com. I will make sure that they are here, links for you so you can see them. But John, before we either decide to just turn off the TV and figure it out tomorrow, or just spend the rest of our night watching election coverage nationally, John, let me ask you, I know that you have the Reckon Interview podcast, and I know you talked to somebody, I believe it was Rick Wilson from the Lincoln Project last week. Tell us a little bit about that interview and how today is playing into things that you spoke with Mr. Wilson about.
Yeah, so Rick Wilson, he's a longtime Republican strategist. He worked with H.W. Bush. He worked with W. He worked with Cheney. He worked with Giuliani. And then in 2016, he was part of a group of Republicans who were very frustrated with the direction of the party and with Trump as the nominee. And he publicly left the Republican Party. And most people with an internet connection or with a TV have probably seen Lincoln Project ads over the last 2 years, last year, I guess I should say. They're very specifically targeted towards, running Republican-style attack ads on a Republican president. Their goal has been to flip some Republicans to vote against Donald Trump. It does not look like they have had a whole lot of success with that in the South, especially in Rick Wilson's home state of Florida. But, if you kind of look down and kind of in some of the margins, you are seeing that Donald Trump is not performing quite as well as he did in 2016 with, some with some white voters, with seniors, and particularly with white voters with college degrees. Whether that will be enough to cut into the margins for Trump in states like Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania, we'll find out either late tonight or early tomorrow. But that has been kind of their operating philosophy, is to go after both Trump and Trumpism, and to restore the Republican Party to a party that sticks to its conservative ideals. Donald Trump has ballooned the deficit. And funding for Planned Parenthood went up under Donald Trump. So things that aren't necessarily considered Republican orthodoxy are certainly have become part of the Republican Party that he represents. And that's what this group of Republicans have tried to go after. I guess we will find out later tonight how successful they were. Or tomorrow.
Well, right before we went live here with you, John, we knew that Doug Jones, right now sitting Senator Doug Jones, was taking the stage to make his concession speech, presumably. And so I'm looking right now at information from our reporter, Howard Koplowitz, who is there. He says that Doug Jones says he has yet to speak with Tommy Tuberville, but he plans to tell Tommy Tuberville, quote, "Now you are the senator for one Alabama," and end quote. And he said that he will just tell Tommy Tuberville to be a senator representing all of Alabamians and not just those who voted for him. Now, we know that Terry Sewell, U.S. Representative Terry Sewell, and Alabama State Rep and Democratic Party Chairman Chris England have also taken the stage at that Jones event here. And also, England said, look, there's still work to be done. And he said that, and he thanked Jones for his service and Jones supporters as well. So we're keeping an eye on what's happening at that Doug Jones event here. I'm not sure if he's still on the stage or not, trying to get that information as we speak, but still a lot of news to come out of the night. But we do know that at least that U.S. Senate seat in Alabama, that race is over. I think we can say that for certain.
I think so. And if Biden does emerge the victor, it's widely expected that Doug Jones, now that he will no longer be the sitting U.S. Senator for Alabama, is expected to have a high-ranking position in a potential Biden administration. So I don't think that his political career is over just yet.
So we have yet to see what is the next for Doug Jones, and what is next for America as in the presidential aspect of things. So as John said, might not get that answer tonight, but hopefully we'll know a little bit tomorrow. That is it for me tonight. Please keep up with all of your election news on AL.com, on both our website and our social media pages. John, thanks for staying up late with me and checking in here. But y'all can catch me back tomorrow at 11 a.m. for your Lunch Break Live. Catch John on the Reckon Interview podcast. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. We will see you tomorrow.